Okay, we're going to welcome all of you to the power of our story. And in our small corner of the world, we get to talk about enduring, timeless leadership principles. And I get the privilege of pulling a topic out of the air that I think can provide some type of benefit to you, the audience, and of course to my friends here on the call. We get together weekly and we discuss things that we believe will improve outcomes in life. All of us have a form of leadership. All of us assume leadership in some form or capacity every day in a family, in a company, in a community. And so the idea of helping us do better with what we have is always something that we strive to do. And I want to start off with a story and then segue it into a concept. And the story is, let me sidestep the story, give you a quick background. In 2013, I launched a company for executive coaching, leadership development, emotional intelligence, top team performance training, and a little bit of culture work, all that stuff mixed in together. And one of the first jobs that I was fortunate enough to do was conflict resolution and helping people kind of put back together some really important relationships that had been damaged by greed and other things. And in my work, a lot of times, we would talk to companies about what they wanted to achieve, whether it was from a performance perspective or just changing the culture so that people would want to stay connected to the company and build and, pursue their vision for their future. And one of the clients that I had a privilege of working with, a small business owner, a woman, we were talking about a lot of things that had to do with business. And she got a call from her sibling that her mother tragically committed suicide. And prior to that, and obviously, when you are in the role of whether it's coaching or consulting, depending upon the level of trust and the level of relationship you build with your clients, clients are inclined to tell you very little or a lot or everything about, what happens in their lives. And this particular client and I happen to have a very strong bond together. And so we talked about obviously just that event, which was shocking. But more importantly, we talked about her last interaction with her mother prior to this happening. And there was a conversation that was had just prior to that was very uncharacteristic of the relationship that she had shared with her mother. And so when this happened, my client internalized this event and connected it to that last conversation. And what came of that was this idea that she felt like somehow her mother lost her love for her daughter, And I had told her after we began to talk about this, I said, look, I'm not a psychologist, I'm not a psychiatrist. And, this is something that, at some point you should probably talk to. But then I said, I'd like to could we talk about this a little bit further? And we did. And we talked about it for several weeks. And what I tried to do was I tried to ask 20 questions about her relationship with her mother, some of the things that she knew that were leading up to the last phone call that the two of them had together, and so on and so forth. And the takeaway from this experience was that together we were able to challenge and confront some of these ideas and some of these perceptions and some of these thoughts that she attached to that last phone call, that after we discussed it in a much more comprehensive, dialogue, were just untrue. We're just not categorically true about the kind of friendship that these two people had. And, it reminded me a little bit about the work that I do now, in coaching. And so now I'm going to take that story and I'm going to segue it over to, kind of my modern day job, because a lot of what I do is in motivation is a lot of mindset work. And I was reading this the other day, and I'm sure Baya, as a clinician, can confirm this, but, social science, brain scientists, they believe that we have 6,000 to 12,000 thoughts a day. 90% of them, I should have asked you, now I can't poll you, I'll poll you on the next one. 90% of our thoughts are repetitive. So whatever we've been thinking up to this point in our life, most of what we think is not new. Now, here's the second question. What percentage of what we think would be categorically negative on a 0 to 100%? What would you say typically the human mind conjures? Pull a number out of the air, 0 to 100%. 0 being hardly ever, 100% being that's all we ever do is think negatively.
Well, okay, so that's a pretty broad question in the percentage.
Yeah.
I typically start at negative, realizing that at best that's incomplete, and at worst it's totally wrong. So I would say the place where you get on the bus, that bus stop can be a negative point, but as I explore it, it's mostly a wrong perception, and I have to figure this out like you did. But within a few minutes, generally, I'm looking at the good that can come from it, so it shifts positive quickly, and that's an adapted skill. If I do what comes naturally, I will do wrong.
Okay. Any other thoughts? What if you were to put a number 0 to 100 on the propensity for the human brain to think negatively? What number would you assign it?
80%. I think it depends on the circumstance of the person. For instance, a homeless person who has lost all hope is going to have a very high negative rating. And those who, for lack of a better term, live their life in gratitude, realize that worry is the energy we spend on the things we can't fix. We know that because if we could fix them, we wouldn't have to worry about them. And so I really think it's a circumstantial kind of a situation. And in terms of a number, probably a low of 15% to a high of 45%.
Okay.
I would go with 65%.
Okay.
And I used to tell people, not the greatest thing, but when people would come to me when I, say, hey, can I ask a question or whatever, that type of thing, I say, okay, right. But remember, we're going to start with no, and then we'll work from there.
Okay. Baya, did you want to repeat your answer? No, you're muted. You're muted.
I mean, in general, I think it's closer to 80%.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's the right answer. Now, this is the right answer from a general wide-based study, right? This is what if you Google this and you look at the research out there, this is the argument that they make. They make this argument that if you even look at the brain anatomy, right? In the brain stem, it's the fight or flight thing. We walk outside, we hear something. What's that? We look down at the ground. Is that a stick or a snake? We cross the road because we want to get to the other side. There's a car coming quickly. Are we going to be hit, right? So most of the sensory stuff that comes into our mind runs through the brainstem, but because of our evolutionary curve, a lot of what we think is in a primitive way, in a protective way. Negative's not like this won't ever work. That's not the way they're using that. I think the word negative. It's more about the fight or flight, the need to survive and protect yourself, right? So being armed with that information, it's really staggering, right? I want to go back and put those numbers together, right? We have somewhere between 6,000 and 12,000 flashes, right? 90% of them are the same thing. That needs to be staggering alone, but 80% of them are not like, gosh, I'm a uniquely amazing human being. I'm going to leave my home and something truly magical is going to happen. I'm going to wake up tomorrow and something is going to be so magnificent. We don't think that way. Or if we do, it's in a very, very limited way. Now, I want to put together that idea with the story I told you about this woman who had a very, very difficult experience in life. And what we underwent was a very primitive, crude version of what Baya might call cognitive behavioral therapy, or cognitive reframing, right? It's a situation where, well, what happened 10 years ago? Well, I got into this situation and it's clear that this person hates me because now that I look back on it, this is how it turned out. Okay, well, let's dig around that. Let's ask some questions. Oh, comes to find out that that person doesn't hate you. That person actually that day lost their parents, and this was the interaction that you had with them at the supermarket. And did you know they lost their parents 10 years ago on the day that you met them? No. Okay. So they don't hate you. They were in shock, right? It's that kind of a learning experience, that you get to look at events historically, and we do get to look and potentially assign different meaning and different value to an event. And as I was putting my thoughts together for our time today and about leadership, and about this idea about, well, 90% of what I think is the same and 80% of it is prone to protect me, and it's not a positive thing. What if we reversed cognitive behavioral therapy? What if we actually took that idea and instead of looking to help somebody solve a problem that they had 5 years ago, what if we created an approach where we actually trained somebody to create 10% new thoughts that were strictly positive in that 90 to 10% repetitive space? And what if we took the 20% that is positive and we came up with very, very specific phrases and ideas and circumstances that was the focus of our lives? And yes, Paul talks a lot about gratitude, which is, I'm not going to undervalue that. It's huge. But beyond even the idea of waking up at 6 a.m. with a cup of coffee and writing 10 things out that you're grateful for, what if we took 20% of our day and we lavished it with these extraordinarily positive ideas? I think it would create a whole different wave of people. Because again, you can't argue with the science. And I know, at some point we will wrestle with this on the call, but the science is the science. And the science is we repeat things that are primarily negative or neutral. That's what we do. And until we're aware of that, and then until we put into place what I'm going to call as a coach, an intentional strategy for better thinking, you're not going to think any better. And you can process a lot of information and share a lot of information and attempt to do good. But if you really want to elevate your thinking, you've got to first be sensitized to the fact that 90% of the things that you think every day are the same, and 80% of the things are not constructively positive. And when that sinks in, you realize, wow, so I've got to be intentional then about my thought life and a strategy to improve my life, because it's not going to happen on its own. So there's a lot of things we can do specifically, but I know Ron's already got his hand up. I mean, Paul's got his, I want to hear, because this is something that I think we need to take seriously beyond the brush that we might give it in the affirmation that we might assign to it. So I think, Ron, you had your hand up first.
Yeah. What happened there? I just left.
You're there. We can see you.
Okay, well, good. Oh, there I am. I think about when that started. All right. So Robert Fulgram's Everything I Needed to Know I Learned in Kindergarten. His idea is live life in wonder and amazement. And when that stops is a certain time in our life, going way back. And the cognition of that, I've just been doing some work on, it's called cognitive distortion. Baya, you probably have done a lot of research in that, but there are 15 characteristics of cognitive distortion, and it's blame shifting, generalizing or personalizing, catastrophizing, and that. And then I'm going to personalize it, because typically things start out as we conversations, but it has to be you and me conversations. So for me, the opposite of depression is not joy and happiness. The opposite of depression is options. So and then you need a thought disruptor. You need someone, you need something to Joe had to have a reboot for it to get better. All right. I mean, Paul, so there needs to be a disruptor. And many times that has to be an external disruptor, something that says, is all of that true? Are all of those things true? And what are your options? And I mean, I have a person I'm working with right now that I'm sure Eeyore was typecasted after this person's personality. It's like, it's gonna rain. You're going on vacation, yeah, but I heard traffic is really bad along the way, and studying it out, and it's like, my goodness, you're going to a new place, and so wonder and amazement. You need a disruptor and not and options of ways to think. I guess I'll leave it at that.
Yeah. Now, before I turn it over to Paul, I will say this. Thank you, Ron. That was very well said. I don't think, for instance, if you look at look at Paul Curtis, for a person that's been as intentional as Paul has been, let's just say even in the last 10 years of his life, I don't think Paul Curtis has 80% of his thinking that's negative, because I think he's trained himself to be a much more buoyant and positive person. Right. I do think people like Paul are a little bit more unique to the world than the average person. I think if you ask the average person when they wake up, they read the news, they consume podcasts and other social media platforms, they go to work. It's a very competitive, aggressive environment. Maybe they have a spiritual component where maybe they pray for 10 or 15 minutes a day, or maybe they go to church on Sundays. I don't think people understand the overwhelming wave of information that's coming at them that is not genuinely positive. Okay, Paul, I'll let you go.
Well, several things come to mind. The first is that my first 80 years of my childhood difficult.
Wait, say that again. You broke up. Say that one more time.
The first 80 years of my childhood were most difficult. Now, the next thing that comes to mind with regard to your story is I believe that the lady that you were exchanging with was feeling abandonment.
Yeah.
I think that abandonment, that was not the first time she felt abandonment.
Right.
She felt it perhaps in childhood. I don't know, but
right.
It was a previous experience that just came to the bubble to the surface when that happened.
Yeah.
The other thing is that when we generate ideas, those ideas come from word association. Any two or more words combined get an idea. And there is scientific proof of that. A friend of mine moved over to Hawaii, went to the University of Hawaii, and did that experiment there and kept doing it until he discovered word association. And his name was Marsh Fisher. He's since passed on. He was the co-founder of Century 21. And that has stuck with me because when I'm fishing around up here for a way to solve a problem or a way to create something, I ask myself, what are the words that will associate that? And to give you an example, if you use the word red, R-E-D, there are 59 direct associations with that word.
Hmm.
And I can send you the dictionary if you want, but probably not. And so I think, and I've seen this abandonment arise in several people, and it alters their behavior considerably in a lot of cases. And they do things that they then, or say things that they regret later on. And so those expressions of regret are things to take notice of, because they have processed through that portion of whatever it is that's bothering them about abandonment. And I'll leave it at that. Baya has her hand up, and she's a whole lot smarter than I am, so we're going to let her go.
And a whole lot less wise than you are. Yeah, I mean, no, I really appreciate what you say. I do believe also I agree with what you say on the abandonment. Is that's a huge abandonment when someone commits suicide. That's a huge abandonment.
Yeah.
And so you trying to grapple with that. I think when she anchored on that last conversation, she was trying to answer the question of why this happened. Because the problem is we as human beings, we have what we call the illusion of control until we realize we don't have control. And so when we don't have control, now you're trying to your brain is trying to make sense of it. And I think that this is what gets people stuck, is the why question, because you will never have an answer to that. What is important is to move them to a how question. How do I overcome that? How do I move forward? Because the why is going to stuck you in the past and you cannot move. Right. And I will say also with what you said, cognitive therapy is very good and very important, but I don't think it's really what helps in moments like that. Because what you need is a work of your conscious mind that makes sense, and your unconscious mind together. So I think one therapy, I would say it's more a tool in therapy that is very useful, is the clinical hypnosis. Because what does the clinical hypnosis? It relaxes the conscious critical mind. So when the conscious critical mind is relaxed, you access more the subconscious with your suggestion, and you can the person is accessing more resources that are in them. And when you do that, you do exactly what Ron talked about: pattern interruption. And that's the key. That's the key of change, is pattern interruption.
Mm. Well said, Baya. Thank you. Ron?
Yeah.
Pattern interruption.
Pattern. Yeah. It's a disruptor. It's an external disruptor. Hardly ever can I have an internal disruptor to my thought process. I almost always need something external to say, Ron, have you ever thought about? Or what are your options? So you as the coach would say, yeah, but how? So Zig Ziglar doesn't say, he tells you, don't say can't, say how can I? Well, if you could make this better, how could you? If you, so I have a coworker that got abandoned at the age of about 2, with her brother who was 4 and her other brother, I think, was 9. I might have the numbers messed up. I'm not intentionally lying. I just can't connect all the dots. And our buddy Scott Mann says, we are fangless, furless, clawless, meaning-seeking creatures, and meaning-seeking storytellers. But so anyways, at that age, the mom abandoned. All right. And the 9-year-old was it. And so here's how it play it forward. Can't go shopping toward the end of the store cycle, like at the end of the day, has to go in the middle of the day because of fear it's going to close up and they'll be all by themselves in a place that they can't get out of. And so being the youngest of that experience, and then realizing that happened then, and not even consciously, and had to connect the subconscious experience with the conscious reality. My daughter will all of a sudden, Dad, do you remember a time when? And I can connect that dots. Oh, then it makes sense. But when this person realized that it was because they were abandoned when they were little and crying and screaming for days, hungry, that scared to death of being alone, it's a fear-driven, very, 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 very rudimentary piece of our brain does this. That it's fear-driven, survival-driven, and sometimes it takes a real intrusive thought to intrude upon that thought process. So there you go.
Go. Jim, your thoughts?
I like what Baya said, that, you know, you've got to get past that whole why thing. Because I just think that that breeds into victim kind of thing, or, you know, whatever, right? And it makes you dwell in the past and not see the future.
Right. Yep. Well
And
said.
I think that's, you know, through the coaching process, right? It's oftentimes trying to get people past that. I mean, that's where they get stuck, right? They get stuck in the why me, you know, and I'll just go share. Sarah's kind of read this recently, you know, I had a number of things that occurred to me health-wise, right? That impacted me throughout my career, you know, and I've come to realize that I, for whatever reason, was always focused on, well, I can do this instead. You know, if this ends my career, I can do this instead because I have this, you know, option. You know, I was focused on what could happen as opposed to why me or woe is me type of a thing.
Love it. Sarah?
Yeah, I have to, I feel like I need to say this too. I appreciate what Jim said. I think, you know, just like, that's true. But again, abandonment through suicide is so complicated. It's such a complicated grief. And I feel like I just want to add that, I personally, and this is my feelings, I don't associate that so much with victimhood, like kind of a woe is me victim. It's more that it is so traumatic that somebody that you love died by their own hand, that it's such a complex grief that you just, it is easy to get stuck. Like, why? And that's why, you know, I appreciate what Baya said, because if somebody is cognizant that if they keep focusing on the why, they're going to be stuck forever. And that's why, you know, as a clinician or therapist, moving somebody to the how, you know, to get over this, to even understand the mind of somebody suicidal can help free you a little bit, not think that maybe the shoulda, coulda, all that stuff for the survivor. So I just, you know, I agree so much with Jim and so many arenas where this can come up, but I just felt like, ooh, if somebody's a survivor of suicide, which is what you brought up, Jim, that abandonment, it is so deep and complex that it may be a different reframe than that. That's all. Just wanted to add that in case somebody's a survivor listening to this.
That's well put. Okay, I think Paul and then Baya and then Ron we got about 10 minutes. I think we should be able to get all three in. Paul or Baya?
Baya, would you like to go first?
No, you can go. That's fine.
Okay. I often find that a pattern disruptor can come in the form of, and actually in two forms. One is a question that is to answer, and the other is very subtle humor. And you have to be cognizant of the mindset of the person that you're dealing with. When they're in deep grief, humor is not welcome. And so you have to be careful about that. The second thing is that I view fight or flight a little different because I've seen it out on the streets, and it's actually fight, flight, or freeze. People freeze because they don't know the consequences of whatever is going to happen next. And with regard to abandonment, the final stage of abandonment is a complete loss of hope. And that loss of hope is what leads to suicide. When people have lost all hope, they have no purpose, they have no function, they have no belief whatsoever in their value to themselves or to anybody else, and off they go. With regard to the why, that is a question that needs to be in that particular circumstance, if it needs to be answered at all. And I say that because somebody who has lost all hope is not interested in your why or their why. They've long since dismissed any value of that whatsoever. But one of the things that I do from time to time is I will go into Starbucks and I will buy a $20 gift card. And then I will hand it back to the clerk and I will say, the next time somebody comes in who needs a cup of coffee or needs something to eat, give them this card. And I have no interest in having credit for it. It's about an opportunity to help somebody who, at the least, is down on their luck and perhaps a lot worse off than that. And I actually, one night, my wife and I were standing in a Starbucks when I did that, and the guy looked at me and he just started crying. He said, "Nobody has ever done that before." I said, "Well, I doubt that, but perhaps not here." And that's really all I have to share on this topic.
Thank you, Paul. Baya?
Yeah, thank you so much, Paul. I love your heart. I will say, when we talk about suicide, you realize that the wound is not just in the brain and in the heart. There's a wound at the soul level, and the soul is very relational. And so this is a very violent attack on the relational soul. So I want to talk about that because I think it's important to realize that this is not something that I like when Sarah says it's complex. It is complex. It is complex because it affects at the trust. It affects people at the trust level. trust in themselves, trust in others. And I want also to attach to it that there's another dimension to it, is usually people that are in that place, they already have, I will say, you need to look at their way of attaching, because when Paul say that people have lost all hope, it's often connected to their attachment style, the way they attach to others. And some attachment style are very reactive, and you do the contrary of what you want. You push people away when you want them in. And so I will say that when you work with a survivor, you need to go a little deeper and try to see how was their attachment to that person, and what is their attachment style. Because if it's the same family, they probably learn the same attachment style of the parent. And so if you want, you really want to create a relationship where they can regain trust. That's all for me.
Yeah.
Thank you, Bob.
Thank you for that, Baya, and for Paul. Paul, in Maslow's hierarchy, you gave that clerk some potential that clerk could be able to realize, because might not have had that potential in the moment when he or she felt sorry or needed to do something for someone. You gave him potential to be able to do something good and actualize his potential. So that's and then exactly what Sarah and Baya say. It is out of control. Nobody gets over suicide, hardly ever. You just don't get over it, because it is the ultimate abandonment. I know someone who their sister ended their life with a pistol on so the person's sister ended on the person's birthday. And every time now that birthday comes up, it's like, how could she have done that to me? Which it was just on my birthday they did that. It's like, couldn't they have done it the day before, the day after? Because that's the day my sister took her life. And so we attach meanings to things that may or may not exist, but we have to attach meaning to it to try and get over it, to try and explain our way through it. And when I attach meaning, you talked about attachment, I may be attaching that meaning incorrectly, and at best, not completely. So
That's great. That's great. Well, we're going to land the airplane there and thank everybody for joining us. Hopefully something has been said that is going to help you think clearly and improve your position and your role in the life that you lead. So thank you for navigating this with us. It's a very complex topic. Just for the record, I didn't want to showcase the idea of suicide as the overarching topic for today, but it was very powerful, and that's what the group bought it, and I wanted to allow the group to take the conversation to the place that it was intended to go. So thanks for joining us. We'll catch you next week.